choosing a partner is one of the biggest decisions you ever make in your life.
Yes.
How can people get that piece right?
When we're young, we're meant to get it wrong. You're not supposed to know exactly what it is that you need in a life partner in your 20s because you barely know who you are. Too many people choose based on chemistry alone and attraction alone. People choose because they're scared to be alone.
What is your take on online apps, dating apps?
Dating apps are terrible if you're only relying on dating apps. They're terrible if this is a terrible habit that people have.
You talk about there's no the one.
We all have this desire to feel whole, and we think that there's just one person, a soulmate, who's going to come into our lives and complete us.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Biohack-it. And I think my guest today needs no introduction. And this is what I've been trying to do for a while. And I'm so glad I was able to find a space in Jillian's schedule. Jillian, you are the leader when it comes to helping people heal their relationship with themselves, with others. And Biohack-it for me truly is all about the mind, body, soul connection. And you and I were just talking about, you can't out supplement your feelings. So thank you for doing this with me and welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for that very beautiful introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you. And so when I was doing a little research and I was like, you have your podcast, Jillian on Love. You've had a really interesting background. You've studied psychology, yoga, meditation, somatic practices. So you really have an incredible wide background from which you come and teach and mentor people from.
Yeah, definitely. I taught yoga for almost 20 years. I've been practicing yoga for about 25 years. And so, yeah, it all began with I think anyone who really gets into yoga, they're on a quest for truth, and they're on a quest to feel better, to feel more connected to themselves, to feel more connected to the world. And so it all started with that.
It all starts with you. And I think that's where, if you guys are listening to this, I think when it comes to relationships, the biggest one is probably the first and foremost is the one with yourself. And you talk about that a lot on your page.
Oh, absolutely. The most important relationship we will ever have is the one with ourselves. And when we are struggling in a relationship of any sort, the first place to look is in the mirror and to see how maybe our relationship with ourselves is impacting that, and also when we improve a relationship with another, we inevitably improve the relationship with ourselves. And the same is true is that when we improve our relationship with ourselves, we will inevitably improve our relationship with others. So I see the two, just like the mind and the body, I see these two entities as being the same thing in many ways.
When we talk about this improvement in the relationship with ourselves, right, and it improves the other relationship. So for people listening that, let's say, maybe single, and they're like, Jillian, I'm looking for love. You probably get that all the time. I'm looking for love. Why am I not finding my person? What is it? But where is that part that they may not be fully honest with being authentic with themselves and truly what they're looking for?
Yeah. Okay. So there's so much here that we can unpack. So first of all, when people are saying, why haven't I found that person yet? The first thing that I would say is because sometimes, actually not sometimes, often it'll take a lot longer than what you want. It just takes time. And why some people will meet someone right away after a breakup and other people will take a couple years. No one has the answer to that. There are some things like maybe the person who found someone right away made a decision that they weren't going to let their heartbreak take them down for so long. And they were like, you know what, I'm going to get back out there. And maybe the person for whom it took a couple of years, they spent a large portion of their time grieving the other person and not letting themselves move on. So there's definitely various factors. And then there's just the factor that, the universe behaves in very strange ways and we cannot control the timing of things. But oftentimes people, the thing that I'm passionate about helping people discover with themselves, if they're single and looking for a relationship, is know really what it is that you want. And I think that, we're not taught this. We're taught indirectly from our parents about what love is. And we're also taught societally to believe in the whole romantic paradigm, which is that, you'll just run into this person and you'll see them and you'll just know and you'll recognize them as a soulmate, and then you'll fall in love. And, and that's why we get so, let's face it, like the very beginning of dating someone who you really like is extremely exciting and it's amazing.
It's the best part almost.
It is in many ways, but it's not the part that is reality. It's the part that is actually very rooted in pretend and fantasy and la la land. So becoming smarter when it comes to choosing people is saying, okay, I don't know a person until I know their character. And I don't know their character until I have navigated conflict with them, until I've seen them with their family, until I've seen them with their friends, until I see them how they are with strangers. I don't know this person at all. And so, you said, how does this come to, a relationship with yourself? Well, a lot of things, like, if you have self-esteem issues, you might be going for the person who does not actually show up for you in the way that you really need a partner to show up for you. You might be spending a lot of time preoccupied with trying to get the person to be interested in you. So your whole strategy is, how can I seduce this person? How can I strategize to get this person to want me so that I can feel validated? Which is a total disconnect from self, which says the self is, I know what I want. I know what I need. This is what I want. This is not about validation. This is about me choosing wisely based on how I understand myself and what I need in life.
That's so true. So I reflect on how that applies to my life. So I went through, I moved to Miami, like I was telling you, about 10 years ago. I had this really bad divorce. Broke up with this boyfriend that wasn't really great just before I met my husband. And exactly what you said right now, I was very clear about what I wanted to feel in my next relationship. And I really searched for that feeling versus like a checklist and said, hey, does this person make me feel these things? Because I'm past the point of looking for validation externally. I feel good within myself. I've done the work, and now I'm going to look towards this person to be like, hey, how do you make me feel when I'm with you?
Yes. And that's crucial. There's one caveat, which is once a year goes by, 2 years go by, 5 years go by, and you're really in this committed long-term relationship with this person, you're sometimes going to feel shitty around them. But that's only because, okay, so let me differentiate. You really should never feel badly about who you are and badly about yourself around someone. But you're sometimes going to be a little bored. You're going to get a little irritated. Your feelings will sometimes be hurt. That is long-term partnership, because when you choose someone, you are choosing someone who is as flawed as you are. Because we tend to gravitate towards those with a similar level of consciousness as our own. And so they are going to disappoint you. But I think where a lot of people get confused is, well, where's the line? Well, if you're starting to see someone, certainly never give your heart to, never commit to the person who you don't feel good around, because in the beginning you better feel really good around them, And so, and then it's about seeing how you navigate conflict together, because that's the big one.
There's another piece that you said earlier is, a lot of times people come into relationships with this preset programming from their family, from their circumstances, their situation. How much of that is also dictated from fear? Because I see sometimes my girlfriends will be like, who are single, will be like, well, this is my checklist of all the things we need. And sometimes like, oh, I must live here. I want to live in the city. And it's like, but why are you attached to this concept versus the idea of just being your full self in a dynamic that's fulfilling? Like, why do they get like married on these little ideas?
I think that, those are the people who are going to probably be single for a very long time, unfortunately. look, people either have impossible standards or their standards are too low, or their focus is on the wrong thing. They're focusing on, this is exactly where I must live, and this is exactly what their height should be, and their color should be, and their hair color should be, and all of that, versus who is this person on the inside? Like, what is their character? And do we, and I will keep repeating this, like, can we do life together? And like, can we navigate conflict together? And can we both agree on what a life well lived is? So that's like the compatibility piece. So you have to really try to stay away from the minutia. And I say that your biggest superpower for people who are single and listening is to discover, is to identify and to go through the process of prioritization. Figure out what your priorities are, because you are going to, even with the best person for you, there are things you are going to have to tolerate. There are things where you are going to have to search very deep inside yourself and learn how to be generous with your appreciation, generous with your kindness, right? Because there's going to be things about them that's going to be bothersome. And you have to be able to say, like, you know, can I love this person anyway? And this is to bring it back to the relationship with self. Most of us were never taught how to love. You either had people running around loving to the detriment of their own mental health, or they are, or, because sometimes we do both of this, we are, you know, oh, you did something that's a little disappointing. Let me pull away a little bit. Let me punish you.
That's conditional love.
Yeah. Let me punish you. Let me play this little game with you. Let me just be pissed at you because unconsciously I'm upset that you are not perfect. You are not the perfect ideal that I projected onto you. So there's a lot of layers to this. Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense. So I sit in these plant medicine ceremonies, and one of the concepts I always teach us is this concept of unconditional love, right? And that doesn't mean you have to be, and for anybody listening, that's not that you have to be a doormat, but love is not meant to be conditional. So when you love a partner, that doesn't mean you don't work on things together, but you don't say, hey, I'm going to give you a few extra hugs and kisses and be a little sweeter to you because you did something that in my eyes makes you a good boy or a good girl, you know?
Right.
And that's how most of us are treating our partners in this day, because we're so scared maybe of being hurt, or like you said, we weren't taught how to love.
Yes.
And that's the pecking like system that we put together, and it's like an eye for an eye.
Yes.
But that doesn't allow us to mature in this love and grow and evolve and start to be vulnerable and safe with each other, because the other person's always on edge being like, I'll be a good boy or a good girl based on my behavior. So they don't fully accept me. And then that's the idea of authenticity.
Yes. And what I would add to that is, I know that you said, you know, you don't want to be a doormat, but aside from being a doormat, you know, you might find that there are things that you can't tolerate in the relationship. Like, people do grow apart. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily loving the person conditionally, but it just means like you have a certain, you know, people do grow apart. So you can love someone fully and also decide that it's no longer working, or you can decide that something in them needs to change in order for you to be with them. It's a tricky line, and I think it's a line that people don't quite. It's very hard to understand, but it's important. Like, if you are going to love someone, you have to be able to leave room for mistakes. But at the same time, again, so many paradoxes you have to define for yourself what's intolerable.
And what you're willing to be okay with and what you're not. And and I always tell everybody, you can never compare one relationship to another. Don't compare yourself to someone else, because you are you. And in that individuality of what makes us, our traumas, our story, our narrative, what I'm willing to tolerate and accept, maybe the other person isn't. And that is okay.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean you accept abuse. Like
No, of
nobody
course
should
not.
accept abuse who's
Of course.
listening. But there's certain standards with things, you know.
Of course not. And I think what we're describing is two opposite ends of the spectrum. On one hand is like the person who tolerates way less than that they deserve. And then the other hand, the other side of the spectrum is, which I think is very common, is I'm expecting perfection from my partner. And whenever they are not exactly meeting my needs all the time, exactly when I want them to, I'm mad at them. And that's a problem too.
Because you're putting people on a pedestal and we forget that people are people and humans are humans.
Yes, totally.
And we're deeply flawed. You said another thing earlier that, people can, 2 points to this. People, sometimes you get into a relationship and you're on the same page and then you develop as individuals, and as you grow, you tend to grow apart. So it's that connectivity sometimes that you need to figure out ways to come back together, whether you share hobbies or mindset, whatever it is. Or if you grow apart, that's also okay. And be okay with that fact that you might be in a different phase in your life, which is why most of the time people tend to get divorced, right?
Yes.
It's because grown apart, you just are not the same person anymore.
Yeah.
So while people are together, do you think couples, whether it's weekly or monthly, should do touch bases with each other?
Totally.
And be like, hey, where are you on things? Like, what's inspiring you nowadays?
Every week.
What's motivating, right?
Every week. Every week. Yeah.
I think it's so important that people need to date themselves, but also still continue to date each other.
Oh, absolutely. Every week, check in with your partner. And you can check in, you can have 2 check-ins. You can have a check-in on logistics, like, running the household, kids, money, all of that. And then you can have your weekly check-in of taking each other's emotional temperature. Like, how can I be a better partner? Like, what do we need?
Yeah.
What do we need? Do we need more sex this week? Do we need to go on a date? Do we need to go on a vacation? Do we need some more quiet time together? What do we need?
And I think also in looking at your, like, the year, what are you excited about that's coming up? Individually, it doesn't always have to be the same thing.
Yes.
You're not going to always be excited about the same stuff. I have to personally say from experience that what has got me through my marriage when we've had really low points is the same outlook on life. Like the things that made us both happy as individuals. Not that they were the exact same hobby or down to a T, but we wanted to have the same outcome from our life. So community was really important to us. Family was really important to us. Yes. So when you're choosing a partner, and this is where I'm going to go into next, you say that choosing a partner is one of the biggest decisions you ever make in your life.
Yes.
How can people get that piece right? Because a lot of times I find women more than men delude themselves into this idea of like a checklist of Mr. Perfect, and then they're in it and the honeymoon phase wears off and they're like, oh shit.
Yeah. Men do it too. I think who you choose to partner with and who you choose to spend your life with is one of, if not the most important decision you will ever make, because the person you partner with will have a huge impact on your overall well-being. That said, when we're young, we're meant to get it wrong. And, you're not supposed to know exactly what it is that you need in a life partner in your 20s because you barely know who you are. But that said, I think that, you mentioned something that I think is so important, a common vision. Like, one of the main reasons why couples will grow apart is because they're not connecting to a common vision, a common goal in life. And you really, really need that. And so you want to choose someone who, like I said, you navigate conflict well, you have a common vision. And I think that too many people choose based on chemistry alone and attraction alone. People choose because they're scared to be alone. A lot of women will have the pressure of their biological clock, or maybe their families are saying you're getting to a certain age, you need to get married. Yeah. And so this pressure to find someone is really detrimental to people. It's actually very dangerous for people because people then get involved in relationships that are not right for them. And then the other thing that I will say is that it's really important, and people do not like to hear this, so this is not going to be popular, but nonetheless, it's important to enjoy your time alone. You must be okay with being single. You must, because if you're not, then you are at grave risk of choosing someone who's very wrong for you because you don't want to be alone. So I'm not saying you need to forfeit your desire to be in a relationship. You can still have those moments of longing, but you need to be able to be okay also with your own company and to live your life to the fullest now. No, don't wait for the partner to live your life.
I think this is such an important point because people tend to settle.
Yes.
And so earlier you said there's some people have unrealistic expectations, but then some people just settle and they're like, oh, I'll just take this because it's right in front of me. And what if I can't find something else? There is that idea. And I have a bunch of single girlfriends. So when we're speaking, I always tell them, I was like, you need to live your life and have so much fun.
Yes.
Doing you.
Yes.
And not everybody who you go on a date with, don't think of them as the one. Don't romanticize it. Be like, listen, I'm just going to have fun.
Yeah.
Kind of like how men do with women.
Yeah.
And when something clicks a little more, it clicks. And then you don't put that pressure on yourself to be always wondering, where is that person?
In fact, I would have very low expectations every time you go on a date.
Totally. That's such a good piece of advice, you know?
Very low expectations. Just assume they're just not going to be a person that you like, but make it so that it is your opportunity to practice your social skills, which is very important, which most people do need to practice. Yeah. Getting to know another person, practice being more relaxed in your body when you are on a date and you feel sort of maybe shy or tense. So see it as practice.
Get the reps in before you meet the person. Obviously, you all know I'm a biohacking fanatic and I absolutely love peptides. So you can only understand how excited I was when I discovered a skincare brand that works, that uses peptides. That is OneSkin. OneSkin uses the amazing OS1 peptide. OS1 works by actually switching off the senescent cells that drive the aging of your skin. Scientifically proven to give you biologically younger skin with long-lasting improvements in firmness, elasticity, reduction of fine lines and wrinkles, and a more youthful complexion. You can learn more about the OS1 peptide at oneskin.co and use my code Biohack-it for 15% off your purchase. There's another thing that I want to touch upon is fighting style.
Okay.
So people fight differently based, again, on their background, their emotions. Some people, like in conflict, they just kind of curl up and they don't voice themselves. Yes. Some people can get really like mouthy and almost like scream. And so I remember back in the day, a coach had told me, you have to learn each other's like fighting style almost. Yeah. So can we touch upon that? Because a lot of people don't cover that.
Yeah. So, everyone's family of origin deals with it differently. So you might be someone might have been raised in a family where there was like a loud expression of emotion. And then they date someone whose family was very tight-lipped. They didn't talk about it. So then when person A is like is just maybe speaking to them according to them, when they're talking in a normal tone. To the other person, they're like, oh my God, you're yelling. Yeah. So what's important to understand is this. The meaning that we assign to things is very different. And everyone assigns meaning to different circumstances based on their own past, based on their childhood, based on their conditioning. So someone could just be talking like this, and the person who was raised in a very quiet family would say, you're yelling. And then the person who's talking is like, what do you mean? I'm not yelling. This is just this is just me. So that's really where people have to understand their differences. Then we fall into some sort of like attachment style stuff where when there's an argument, they pull away and the other person wants to talk about it. What I will say is that pulling away is dysfunctional behavior. It doesn't matter how you look at it. And pulling away is never, ever good. What you can say is, I'm a processor. So when we have conflict, I know that I need about a day to process and to think about it. And then I will come back and talk about it. So and then you could be someone who's like, I want to talk about it right away. But if you love this person, you give them that space to process. That's different than someone who just pulls away. because pulling away is a power move. We do that to regain power in the relationship. And the person who can pull away is the person who has all the power in the relationship. So you never want to do that. But as far as yelling and not yelling, and then it's like if you come from a family that's very quiet and the person's yelling, I mean, this could be the deal breaker. Or it could be like, everything else is great. How can we meet in the middle? And the person who's yelling may have to learn how to manage their tone a little bit more so that the other person can hear. And then the person was raised in a very quiet family needs to raise a little bit their threshold for volume so that they don't take things as such a personal attack every time this person gets a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for?
Riled up,
or just emotional or just like excited about something. Yeah.
That's just, they're being, what is your take on, online apps, dating apps?
Well, I have a few clients who met the quote unquote love of their lives on dating apps. So, but one of but they did something very specific things. One is they didn't rely on the dating apps. Number two, they gave themselves a limit of how long they would, swipe or be on it. They refused to engage in any kind of long-winded texting exchanges with someone. It's like, let's get on a Zoom, let's get on a FaceTime right away and let's see what's happened. Another thing they did was that they expanded their I've never been on a dating app in my life. So they expanded their
search.
Yes, exactly. So that, if they had to drive an hour, they would drive an hour. Dating apps are terrible if you're only relying on dating apps. They're terrible if you are, and this is a terrible habit that people have. It's like, oh, I've been texting with this guy for a month or for 2 weeks. Now we're going to meet.
Yeah.
And you get this false sense of intimacy.
Correct.
And then the person doesn't even show up to their first date. They're like, I don't understand what happens. Like, never, ever, ever do that.
Yeah.
We're all adults. You don't want to build a relationship based off of text. Not a good idea. So I say, do the dating apps if you want to, but don't rely solely on them.
And what's your take on matchmakers?
Every person I know who's used one said it was a total waste of their time.
Yeah, that's what I hear a lot of, but I'm wondering.
But I can't say that they are because I don't have enough data to support. There are people out there that maybe it has worked.
Actually, I'm going to correct myself. I'm South Asian. I come from a culture of, it's very common to matchmake. Yes. So it has been very successful. I know for some of my Jewish friends, it's been very successful for my South Asian and kind of Muslim friends.
So it might be a cultural thing and certainly, a cultural thing, a religious thing where it might be actually.
Yeah, and it works out. But I was always wondering because sometimes I'm like, hey, why don't you see from a female perspective, they don't have to pay as much. I know men have to pay like sometimes 2 arms and 2 legs. But I was like, I come from a culture where it's pretty normal to sign up for a matchmaker and they kind of match you up and you have to take it from there.
Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that in certain cultures, they're not looking for soulmate, they're looking for the right match. And so they're actually much more practical. They're looking for values aligning. And that's a very important thing. It's not just understanding a person's character. Well, a person's value system does in many ways define their character, but it's a matching of values. And so I think that a lot of people in these cultures are looking for that because they understand that that's what's necessary for family, for long-term partnership and for building a family together.
So you said something that is extremely important, which is why sometimes a lot of South Asian or even Jewish marriages are very successful.
Yes.
They cut through the bullshit of the honeymoon phase and they're like, what makes person A and person Y compatible? Do you look at life the same way? How many kids do you want to have? How do you plan to raise them? Religious, non-religious?
Yes.
Where do you want to live?
Yes.
What are you willing to compromise on?
Yes.
Are you willing to live with your in-laws? So all those checklists of questions that people don't ask themselves till sometimes a year in and then look at each other like, oh, you don't want to have kids, but I want to have kids. Like they cut through that because they don't romanticize it. They're like, hey, this is your checklist.
Yes.
This is their checklist. this is what you are willing to do and not do. This is what they're willing to do and not do. And this is where you guys will meet in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I am so passionate about teaching people to have these conversations early on, because you're correct. People, they don't have these conversations, and then a year in, they're like, what? And it's very hard to end a relationship when you're a year in and you're very attached to the person. And it's a disaster for many people.
Also, I want to touch upon the topic of finances, because that is probably one of the things that people fight about.
Money and sex.
The most. Yeah, those two things.
Yeah.
So when you're coaching people, you're talking to them, how do you like let's say said client is here and I come to you and I'm like, Jillian, I'm a client, met this guy. I think I really like him. What would you advise me to do?
If it's a woman coming to me, if it's this scenario, I would say you better have your own money. Have your own money.
I'm so glad you said that.
Have your own money.
Yeah.
Never, because the millions of women who are in a position right now in a marriage or in a relationship that they are miserable in, but they're not leaving because they don't have money. They don't have financial resources. And then what I would say is, have your own money, and also be willing to leave to change your lifestyle if you're miserable in a relationship.
100%.
Yeah. So ladies, make sure you have your own money.
So I'm so glad you said that, because I come from, let's say in Pakistani, so I come from more of a traditional mindset.
Yes.
I've always worked and I love working and I love to be financially independent with my needs and know that. But at the same time, I was able to express to my partner, hey, I still want to play more traditional gender roles, but that does not mean I'm staying home and raising the kids. So I'm going to still do me, but I have certain expectations from you as my partner and I was pretty upfront about it. I remember we had just started dating and we were taking a train from Florence to Rome to catch a flight somewhere. And he said, because I'd had a bit of an upset in my relationship before that, so we just went straight into it. And he's like, what's your break? Is it 50-50? I was like, no, that is not acceptable to me.
Yeah.
And we negotiated and I said, listen, babe, you work in finance. I work in marketing. I think what I'm comfortable with is like an 80-20. But we negotiated that up front. So whenever fights did come up, I always go back to them and say, hey, remember that conversation we had about what I'm comfortable with and what I'm willing to do? But at the same time, I will tell people listening to this, you need to be flexible based on if something happens to the other person's career.
Of course.
You can't be a raging asshole about.
You absolutely cannot be. And I'm so glad you brought this up. It's very important. People do need to talk about their roles, money, how it's going to be spent, all of that. These are the conversations that need to happen very early on, 100%.
And even if they happen, I've noticed it happened with us. I'd still have to be remind when a fight came up and it's like, he got frustrated. I'm like, no, we just spoke about this.
Yes.
This is what we established as our not roles, but kind of accountability on each part.
Yeah. And then, look, there's so much negotiation in a long-term relationship. Sometimes you have to renegotiate stuff. Sometimes people get sick. Some people lose their jobs. Ultimately, you're supposed to be allies in life. So
partners.
Yeah.
And then about the sex part. So sometimes it's a big piece.
Especially for women.
So I have friends in relationships and sometimes their partner wants to have sex 5 days a week. And I'm like, what? That's exhausting. I'm in my 40s. I couldn't even think about that,
So funny.
How do women, from a female perspective or even from a male perspective, what if a woman feels like she can't give that to her partner, or if a guy feels he's not getting enough from his partner?
Well, I'm going to say a few things about this. So in general, women are not as sexually satisfied in their long-term relationships and marriages. And that is because women in general have a hard time speaking up for what they need in the bedroom, because we've been so conditioned to try to be hot in the bedroom, try to please them, be like the porn star, be that's women, whether we like to admit it or not. every woman is trying to figure out a way when she starts seeing someone, how can I seduce him? And we know, so we're speaking very heteronormatively here, right? So I just want to make that very clear. Because people date all sorts of people.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to a woman dating men, you know, women are well aware of the fact that men are sexually driven in a way that are more sexually driven than women, typically speaking. Typically. Yeah. That's not always. And so that's our conditioning. That's what we think of. Like, our conditioning says his biggest priority is sex. So a woman then has sex for the first time with a guy, and she's not thinking about her pleasure. She's thinking about, how can I turn him on so much that he's going to become addicted to me sexually? And so that's how we're seductive. And the problem with that is that then women, when we do, is that we learn to ignore our own pleasure in the bedroom. And we end up just kind of accepting sort of like okay in the bedroom, because we don't want to rock the boat, or we don't want to bruise his ego, or we're just like, you know, we're thinking too much about their pleasure and we're not thinking about our own. Meanwhile, what really is the biggest turn on to anyone who's sleeping with a woman is that she is very turned on. Yeah. Any man and any woman who I've spoken to who sleeps with women says the biggest turn on to me is her really getting, having all her pleasure. So there's a lot of like disconnect there. So there's that piece. I am of the belief that, and I will give some caveats to this, that when you're in a partnership with someone and you love someone, that means sometimes having sex when you're not in the mood, because that is what's good for the relationship, and that is what your partner needs. So I think that sometimes you just have to do it, because most of the times when you start doing it, you're like, okay, this is not so bad. This is actually good. We're connecting. And so I think it's a very, very important thing. Of course, there are certain things like, you're exhausted, you're like working and you're taking care of the kids, and like there's an imbalance there. And then it's like, then you're supposed to have sex, and then you're supposed to you're supposed to have sex in a way that's about their pleasure, not your pleasure. So there's layers to this. Yeah. And this is why there has to be conversations. But just from the surface level, we have to have sex sometimes when we're not in the mood, because we're serving the relationship that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think it's healthy for women to have like parameters around it? Like, let's say if a partner wants sex 5, 6, 7 days a week, whatever it is, people who have that kind of drive. And she says, you know what, that's overwhelming for me. Can we, almost like you negotiated, like we're talking about the finances. Is it okay to negotiate the sex piece to some extent? Not to take the excitement out of it, but to say, hey, that's too much for me. Can we figure out something that works for both of us?
Yes. But I think that there's a deeper issue here, which is, why was it too much always, or is it too much now because you're overwhelmed with something else?
Oh, that's a really
so it's like, what's changed, so that you can bring that into the conversation, which is, I find myself very exhausted at this time because of all this going in my life. Maybe I have to address that, or maybe we need to do this at a different time of day and not like at night. So it's a conversation.
I think it's also important for everybody listening to long-term relationships, can become repetitive. You guys end up becoming like roommates. It's very important having an intimate touch base, because it keeps things romantic versus you guys just becoming like roommates to each other.
Yes. And not spending every waking moment together.
Right.
Yeah.
And having those like little moments, whether it's away or you create a sense of intimacy with each other, and it has a little bit of element of surprise still. Rather than being robotic.
Yes, absolutely. And just trying different things. And look, it's also like, to bring this back to the relationship with self, oftentimes what happens is that someone will start to lose interest in sex that has nothing to do with the relationship and has nothing to do with their partner. It has to do with how they're relating to themselves. They feel disconnected from passion in their lives. They feel critical of their bodies. They feel they have a tremendous amount of stress, so they are consumed by their stress, and so they're not connected to their joy. So there's
so much.
Yeah.
There's a quote of yours that I love that kind of sums up everything you kind of just said. And the quote goes as, no one teaches us how to be in a great relationship. No one teaches us how to pick our partners. If you want to get better at intimacy, we have to face our fears. Be willing to make mistakes, let go a lot of grudges, and have many uncomfortable conversations. There's no other way. That's just the work.
That is the work of a long-term relationship.
So in essence, the beautiful thing about what we're saying over here is this is common and people will have this at different stages in their relationship, but this is just part of the work. This is just part of being in a relationship.
It's part of being in a relationship is constantly trying to get over our own egos. And in many ways, being single is easier because we get to be incredibly self-serving and selfish.
I think also nobody's triggering, nobody's mirroring all the things you have to work on, and you just make that delusion for yourself.
That's a really, really incredible point, which is that no one knows you as well as the person who you live with.
Yeah.
And so they see the weaker sides of you. Mm-hmm. They see the shadow side of you in a way that others don't. And so they're going to be mirroring that, and it's incredibly uncomfortable. But that's why a relationship, that's why it's so important to partner with someone who you feel safe enough with, mm-hmm. who you can grow with, who you both can have conversations about the more unsavory sides of each other, and know that like you are supporting each other as you work through that. That's so incredibly important.
I think that's also where you made a point earlier. It's very important to understand who you're getting into a relationship with, who that person is on the inside. Because the wrong person, male or female, if they're narcissistic, they will take your shadow because they are so intimate with you. There's no relationship like a couple, right? They're the most intimate relationship in the world. And they will use that
against you,
weaponize it against you.
Yes.
And that's where
when you break up with the person, period, end of story.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But so many people are in these toxic, that's something I want to go into, is like these toxic relationships and don't even realize it. But because they put this person on a pedestal, they're not realizing, the person might have narcissistic qualities or whatever. And then they weaponize the shadow.
Yes. So with toxic relationships or unhealthy relationships, there's different kinds. There's the kind where you're in a relationship with someone who's victimizing you in some way. Mm-hmm. They're emotionally abusive, like a narcissist, they're physically abusive. But then there's just the unhealthy relationships where the two of you are both showing up as teenagers consistently and blaming each other for your own unprocessed emotional pain and expecting each other to rescue one another. Mm-hmm.
It's like,
it usually takes two to tango. And then there are, of course, the cases that are abusive in some way. Those are less common than two people who are just co-creating chaos. Correct. Yeah.
I think too many of us blame other people for our emotions are our responsibility. It starts with us. It's accountability to us.
Yes.
That doesn't mean you take shit from somebody, but that means you take responsibility. Is my reaction coming from a place of fear, or is this making me feel such a way and that's where I'm having this lash out? Like, where am I going to take responsibility for how I am feeling as a person?
Totally. And we're going to mess up. Like, we're going to sometimes you just have to be like, I once worked with a couple, and they didn't have a lot of problems. Things were just like, they just wanted things to be better. But something that he did, that the husband, that was so brilliant. Whenever she would be triggered or she would have a reaction that was clearly coming from her inner child or whatever, mm-hmm. he would inject humor into this and be like, oh, is that, wait. Is that 12-year-old you? Is that 14-year-old? Wait, I just want to be prepared. And she would immediately start laughing. And it was so beautiful because it was so, in that moment when he does that, now that doesn't mean that she was able to walk all over him. It's just mm-hmm. like when she was having a moment and he was able to use humor, because that's something that he saw his father do. And it was so lovely because in that moment, he was being so generous with his love in that moment. He's like, I love this woman. Sometimes I know that I can be reactive. She's patient with me. This is just my way. And she was like, she said to me privately, and she said, even though he can sometimes be a pain in the ass, blah, 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 I will never leave this man. I will never stop loving him because of how generous he is with me when I can be kind of like a bitch or very reactive. And I said, you are a wise woman.
That's a really great reflective insight that she had.
Yeah.
I think that also she seems to know that how he shows love. So there's another piece to this. Sometimes we get into, or we're in a relationship and we're like, well, we don't feel seen and this is how I expect to be seen. But we have to remember somebody else might have a different love language in how they show us that they love us.
Yes. I think there's when it comes to love languages, I think there's a couple of things. One is I think we need to learn to speak each other's love languages. And then number two, we also have, even as we are each other's student and trying to learn each other's love language, we also have to be aware of the fact that like someone's love language might still be a little foreign to you. And so you have to be attuned to when they are actually giving you love.
Right.
Yeah.
And being receptive to how they want to show you love, not how you want to be loved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we have to give love in the way, not just in the way that is comfortable for us, but in the way that is another person needs it. That
they can reflect on it. We wouldn't have a podcast talking about optimizing women's health without talking about BodyBio. I use BodyBio every single day, and their hero product is a necessity for everyone in my house. PCs of pure liposomal phospholipid complex that helps protect the 70 trillion cells in our body from aging, environmental stressors, and toxin exposure. This little guy is great for everyone, you, your husband, your kids, and even your pets. Our health truly starts with ourselves, and PC gives them the support and maintenance they need. To learn more about BodyBio, head over to their website, www.bodybio.com, and use the code Biohack-it for 20% off your first order. And if you've already purchased BodyBio and want to rebuy, use Iman at checkout for 15% off all your orders. There's something you talk about that's amazing. You talk about there's no the one.
Yeah.
What is that concept? I mean, I understand it, but for anybody listening, like what is the...
So romanticism tells us that, that there is this one person who's going to come into your life. I mean, okay, so let me backtrack. Every single person, regardless of where they live in the world, culture, gender, doesn't matter. Every single person seeks oneness. We seek feeling whole. When we meditate, it's because we want to feel whole. When we're sick and we want to heal, healing means we just want to feel whole again. And so we all have this desire to feel whole. And we think that there's just one person, a soulmate, who's going to come into our lives and complete us, because that's what literature has taught us basically since the 18th century. This is what movies and rom-coms tell us. And because rom-coms are all about the beginning of the relationship, they're not really about, the 20 years in. And so we have this idea that someone is going to come in and they're going to be able to understand us more than we even understand ourselves, which is absolutely not true. That they are going to be in many ways the perfect parent that we wish that we had, even if we had a great parent. They are going to nurture our inner child. They're going to understand our inner child, and they are going to never leave us. And that does not exist. In fact, there is the one who was right for you at 17, then there's the one who's right for you at 45. There's many, we have to choose who that person is going to be. We have to say, this is a flawed person, but I choose them. Just like this, like the story I told you of that couple. She's like, he can be a pain in the ass, whatever, but he is so generous with his love with me that I choose him forever. Yeah. And that is, to me, that's wisdom. To me, that's being smart. To me, that's being grounded in reality. And so, yeah, so we are all seeking that, when the reality is that oneness is not really something that's let me backtrack. In the beginning, in the honeymoon phase, it definitely feels that way.
Yeah.
But no one can actually be that for us all the time. We have to be that for ourselves. And that life, what's built into the reality of living, is that we will move in and out of balance and imbalance. We will sometimes not feel whole, but we have to be able to see that, like, ultimately it's our responsibility, and that no other person can actually do that for us. They can make it easier for us. They can love us as we are healing. They can hold our hand. They can be patient with us, but it is ultimately our responsibility. That's the same thing as, you can have a therapist who holds your hand as you heal. You can have a doctor who holds your hands as you heal. But ultimately, anything that we want to overcome really comes down to something that is inside us, which is called will. And it is a will to live. It is a will to heal. It is a will to get better. It's a will to feel more whole. It's a will to just experience more joy. And we have all these helpers around us. And if you're smart, you'll choose someone who wants to be a little helper for you, and you want to be a helper for them. But the onus is always on us.
You said something so impactful, and I just want to dive into that a little bit more.
Sure.
That people who are healed and have done the work on themselves don't get into wanting to save other people or want to be saved, because they understand it starts with me. This is my responsibility.
No one's ever fully healed.
Right? No, of course not.
Yeah.
But when you've gone through a baseline of being like, I'm not going to look for somebody to save me, and I'm not going to sign up to save you.
Yes, that's important, because a lot of people like to do that.
People love to get into the savior syndrome.
Yes.
Like, this person's broken. He or she is broken. I'm going to be the knight in shining armor. I'm going to be the woman who changes his life.
Yeah.
How do we get better at identifying that? Because sometimes people meet somebody and, you're, like you said, you're never fully healed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at what stage do you get to within yourself, or you can see that coming on and be like, I know what I'm doing that thing again. I need to not do it.
I think that's what we all have to do. We all have certain patterns that are very familiar to us relationally. And we can break a fair amount of that pattern by choosing different partners. Like, for example, not choosing the partner who's got a humongous problem that you want to go and save and fix. But at the same time, we can fall into these patterns inside of the relationship. So this is where self-awareness comes in. Self-awareness comes in when we are saying, like, this is one of also the important conversations. It's like, I have a pattern. This is how I can sabotage. This is how I can get in the way of, us really being the healthiest we can be. So, like, I'm going to be aware of it. I want you to be aware of it. When you notice it, bring it up. And so that's just really self-awareness. It's like, oh, I'm doing that thing again. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take a different route. I'm not, they're upset right now. My habit might be like, let me fix their mood, because I grew up in a family where there was a lot of my caretakers were very unpredictable in terms of their emotions. Mm-hmm. So anytime my partner is feeling less than anything other than happy, I feel unsafe. So I'm going to try to micromanage that. So I'm going to notice when I do that, I'm going to be like, you know what, live and let live. I'll let them know if they want to talk, I'm here. If not, I'm going to go focus on my life. And it might be very hard, but that's life.
What are you, Jillian, thinking about all the people you coach, all the couples you interact with, sometimes single, sometimes together?
Yeah.
Like, what are red flags in women and what are red flags in men? For people come to you.
Oh, well, I would say red flags in just let's start with everyone overall. Like, so the biggest red flags are as follows. One is anyone who is violent in any way. They can't control their anger. So that's the biggest red flag, is violence. And then there's the red flags of someone who has very weak character. So they're not kind. They're not generous. They don't care about the well-being of others. They are very selfish. So those are red flags. And then there are the red flags of someone is just not exhibiting signs that they are very interested in you.
Yeah.
You know, they're giving you mixed messages. They call only when it's convenient. So those are red flags too. There's also the red flags that we have inside ourselves, which is, oh, I have a tendency to tolerate less than I deserve, but not want to be honest about it, because to be honest about it means, like with my friends and my family, means that I'm going to lose this person, right? I want to say, you know, red flags, I'm trying to think of it from a gendered perspective. I mean, I certainly think that if you're dating women, a red flag is a woman who is just after your money, and
That's
not
a huge one.
and
yeah.
not after who you are as a person, because there's a lot of women who will focus more on the money aspect. A red flag in a man is, well, both men and women can be violent, but a red flag in a man is someone who does not have, I would say this in general, like everyone needs to be able to regulate their emotions. But, you know, for a man who watches a lot of porn, that's a red flag. So a man who doesn't have he doesn't have control of his sexual energy in that way. He doesn't have control of his not sexual energy, sexual impulses.
Right. That's a very dangerous person to be with, because
100%.
they're going to be like, oopsie daisy, this is just, you know, I couldn't help myself. And you're going to wake up one day and be like, oh, so now I'm accepting cheating and I don't feel good. And so,
So a man who can't control his temper, a man who can't control his sexual impulses, huge red flag. You know, again, for women, as women who are shallow and just looking for the money, or, you know, a man who's shallow and just looking for the looks, you know.
So funny enough, we were at dinner on Friday, and I want to run talking about women and sometimes women being shallow and looking at the money.
Yeah.
So we heard, we were at dinner with a bunch of people, and there was a guy there, and he said, hey, like I went on a date with this girl, and she said she's only willing to date me if I buy her X handbag. And my face was like on the floor.
That's unbelievable.
I was like, what do you mean? But another girl in the group was like, well, I think that's really great. She's being really direct. And I looked over and I was like, that's not being direct. That's being materialistic, because you're not willing to look like, kudos to her to speak up and ask for that. But where does that mean her priorities lie?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's a huge red flag. She doesn't care about you. She just cares. She's like, she wants to like buy the bag for me, and then I'll date you.
And then I'll date you. And if you can't continue to buy me stuff, then I might not date you. Might find another person who can just pay for me.
Right. So I would say that's a red flag.
Right?
100%.
But I thought it was so funny that another woman thought
that she was, that she was just being like direct.
Yeah. And I was like,
no,
where have we gotten to in a society?
Yes. Yes.
And it's become more recent. I don't know if it's more of like this consumer culture that we've become, but all of a sudden it's almost become acceptable to be a gold digger.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes from a place of entitlement. That's incredibly, you know, not good for relationships and not good for society at all.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, look, I mean, so that woman is going to want to be with the man who wants the arm candy. And so they will enter, you know,
an agreement.
So, I mean, if she's going to say, you know, do this for me, I would hope that she's good looking, because I don't know what else, because he's just going to do it. So he's looking for the arm candy. She's looking for the gifts, and the two of them will enter a relationship where the nonverbal agreement is we're validating each other. But that doesn't sound like a good relationship to me. And
their value systems are not aligned for long term. So at some point, this is where like there's a really high divorce rate, like I would say in some instances, is that people enter into these relationships with these very superficial guidelines of what they want to do with each other. And when the going gets tough, because that's life and that's relationships, and cracks start coming up because they haven't agreed on and really loving each other through the core of somebody.
Yes.
And the value systems are not there.
Yes.
That's when like the chaos comes in.
Total chaos. Utter chaos.
And there's also this idea of like, you just touched on earlier when you were saying, hey, red flags. So people give mixed messages. So sometimes you see girlfriends or guy friends, they meet somebody, they're like, oh, I went on this date and we spoke, and this person was like vulnerable with me or so special. And sometimes I sit there and I'm like, but you don't know them.
Yeah, you don't know them.
And then they're like, oh, well, they're not texting me back yet. So this idea of mixed messages early on, that's obviously a red flag, right? But why do we make excuses for it as people?
Okay, I have a lot to say about this one. Okay, so there's a couple of things. So in the beginning, because we're looking for the one, what happens is that we meet someone and let's just say we have a lot of chemistry with them. It's multi-layered chemistry. We're physically attracted to them. There's like an emotional chemistry. There's maybe an intellectual chemistry. And we meet them, we go home, and that person has left a mark on us. Like we can't shake them. And then we enter something called limerence, where we start to get obsessed about the person and we start to romanticize, and then we start to think about how they are in bed or how they are and how we're going to be in a relationship with them. And we get lost in this fantasy. And then we get very ungrounded. And all of a sudden, this person who is a stranger has somehow earned the starring role of your life because of that at one date. And then we get obsessed. They're not texting us back. Well, it's like, well, you just had one date. They don't really
owe you anything.
They don't owe you anything. And what you've done is that you have gone into a state of limerence where you're making it all about them and you're getting lost in the fantasy. And what you've forgotten is that you don't know this person. But I think where it's just to throw everyone, all of us, a bone is, it's not every day that we meet someone, we have that kind of connection with them. And so there is a slight scarcity to that because it's not every day. But the fact is that we can have amazing chemistry with someone who could then later abuse us. We can have amazing chemistry with someone who actually is very, very wrong for us, or someone who we end up hating, a year later. So it's really about having practices where you're just grounded and you remind yourself, like I had this. You name it. You say, I had this really great experience. I'm very excited right now. This is called processing your enthusiasm. I'm very excited right now. I don't meet people that often. This is very exciting for me. But I also know that this is also like a stranger and they could be very, very good at seduction. Mm-hmm. They could be, very good at putting their best foot forward in the beginning, and only time will tell. And so I'm going to process, I'm going to continue to date others. I'm going to continue to focus on my life. When I'm starting to daydream and getting into that whole limerence state, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to put a cap on it. And, the mixed messages is more like when you're consistently dating someone and it's like, they sometimes text right back, sometimes they don't. Or like you have a big mixed messages, you seem to be having like these great dates where you're getting closer. And then when you're not together, it's like they're a complete stranger. Right. And then you're like, wait, did I imagine this? Like, are we on the same page? This is when you have to open up your mouth.
And ask.
And say, and you don't, and this is what women do that drives me crazy, especially women who date men. It's like they ask him because they want the man to lead, like, so what's happening? Mm-hmm. Instead of what I really want to empower women to say is to be vulnerable and to be honest and to say, every time we hang out, I feel like we're getting closer. Like I feel really connected to you. I really like you. But when we're apart, I'm not feeling that connected to you. Like, what's up?
Right.
What do you want?
And from my stance, this is how I'm feeling, but I want to hear it from you. And then we can make a decision together on where this is going versus leaving the ball in their court.
100%.
Do you also see a lot of the times, it could be women and men, but sometimes I see women doing it more. They give up their power too easily nowadays. So They meet somebody, they have a couple of dates. The guy wants some, let's say like raunchy pictures or X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden they've like.
Huge red flag, by the way.
Right?
I should mention that anytime, thank you for mentioning that. Anytime you're texting with a guy and then all of a sudden he moves it to the sexual, you need to nix it right there, then and there.
Thank you so much for saying that. So
horrendous.
Men
do not do that.
They don't deserve it. But also, what has this person done to deserve that part of you? Such a vulnerable, private part of you. What has this man done to deserve that from you?
Yes.
Has he put in the work? Is he your long-term partner? Has he made you feel special? So why are you giving yourself away that way? And then when they don't write back in the right time or they don't say what you want to say, then you feel rejected.
Yes, because women have been taught that to get the partner, you have to give more of yourself, as opposed to standing in your worth, standing in your authenticity, having someone having to earn that, to earn that vulnerability in some way. But you have to be a little bit vulnerable even before someone earns it, because that's what opens up the door. If people are just waiting for the other person to earn it, we won't get anywhere with anyone. But yeah, so this is where self-esteem comes into play. And this is where women get it, unfortunately, very wrong.
The sexual piece is the one, like if a guy, like we just said, messages you and say, hey, send me a hot selfie, and you're just like, no, like, ugh, thanks, but no thanks.
That is the biggest ick of all time.
That's what I think. And I was like,
It's
maybe
vile.
is it because I've been in a relationship for the last 6 years? But I'm like, no, like if I was single and somebody said that to me, I'd be like, what have you done to earn that from me?
Yeah, no. Like that is so gross. Don't do that,
And I think
guys.
that's where we need to look at where our wounds come from, and why are we tolerating that from a male or woman to woman even.
Wounds and conditioning.
Yes. Where are we accepting all that from?
It's very bad.
So, we were originally speaking when you walked in, you've been divorced, I've been divorced, and I want to move away from this horrible stigma away from divorce.
Yeah.
I think divorce, and I want to hear from you because really you're the expert, is one of the most painful things you probably go through in your life. Yeah. It's like a death. Yeah. But it's also okay.
Yes. I think there's a huge stigma around it. There's a huge stigma around it when it comes to women. And it's ridiculous. Look, sometimes relationships don't work out. Why? Sometimes what we need to do, like, we should celebrate making a decision to end a relationship if making that decision is based on doing what's best for your highest good.
Right.
And so there are plenty of people who stay married miserable because of the stigma of divorce, because they don't want to be a divorced person, because they made a promise to themselves they would never be divorced. So they stick it out. And there's an interesting balance here. You do want to work hard and fight for your relationship when you love it. And that is part of the agreement. You want to fight for love and you want to fight for the relationship. But sometimes it doesn't work out, because as fast as life goes, it also can be very long. And sometimes you make a mistake and sometimes you grow apart, and it should really be no big deal. That's how I see it.
And instead, we're made to perpetually feel bad because society has programmed it into us that we are a failure. It's shameful.
Yes.
We feel disappointed. We feel lesser than.
Yes.
And that is not okay.
No. And
that
in certain
archaic
cultures,
way of
it's a
saying,
lot worse.
Yeah. I come from a culture like that where it's like, okay, you can just accept it. And it's like, no, it's not acceptable. You deserve to be happy, and your happiness matters.
Yes.
And if this person is not fulfilling you, why are you going to spend the precious gift of a life, because life is extremely precious, on something that will not fulfill you?
Yeah, absolutely.
It brings me to kind of towards the end of the episode, but there's one thing I want to ask you. So I was watching this documentary the other day and I was shocked. My mouth was on the floor. Have you heard of this website called Ashley Madison?
Oh God, yes. And I did watch that. Oh yeah.
So I do need to talk about that, because
Let's do it.
Where in a culture have we think it's acceptable for your partner to go have affairs? Like,
it's very sad.
The amount of people who were signed, did they say they had like close to 600 members in the world?
Yeah,
or 600 million, 600 million members.
Oh, I don't know if it's 600 million.
It was something, some crazy number around the world. Like
no,
globally, that's how many memberships they had, or some crazy number.
It's very sad. It's very, very, very sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I was watching the documentary. I was shocked. Firstly, the CEO obviously was like king of monogamy, and then he was not.
Of course not. Yeah.
But I was just wondering, like, what is your take on people getting into relationships and knowing that there's a partner who cheats, but will turn a blind eye and say it's okay? No, it's everybody goes through this. I have a lot of girlfriends who sometimes say that. And I look at them and I was like, are you crazy? Like, they're like, so-and-so gets cheated on. It's just like, it's okay. It was early on. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, infidelity is a big, big topic. And, most people, when they have an affair, because there's something that's lost inside of them. They're trying to reconnect to a part of themselves that feels like it's died inside of the marriage, which is not the responsibility of their partner, but is the responsibility of themselves, So we always have to figure out a way to keep the passion alive internally while we're in a relationship. And so, and then, as I watched that documentary, that one guy who they followed throughout, who worked it out with his wife, he that was a very perfect example of why people cheat. He said, I had this idea that a marriage, he had the romanticized paradigm that it should be perfect and all of this. So he went into it. He's like, finding my dream woman. And so what he realized is that marriage is not always perfect and you have to work on it. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't, it was too confronting for his own belief system. So then he sought out that feeling of aliveness elsewhere. So that is the most common reason why there's infidelity. I think that, I know people who've worked through it.
Yes.
And they worked through it only because they had an excellent therapist. Three things happened. They had an amazing therapist who was very, very in their face about it. The person who cheated expressed extreme remorse and wanted redemption. And then the other person was able to see how they contributed to the problems that they were having in the relationship. And that's really the only way. And then there are some people who say, there's no cheating. Like for me, there's no cheating. If one of us cheats, it's over.
That's it.
And but when I say that, that means that I'm going to make sex a priority for us. I'm going to make us communicating a priority. I'm going to make it so that there's no, that's not going to come into our lives. I'm going to talk about when I'm not happy. I'm going to all of that. So where in a society, where have we gone where this is happening? I think it's sad. Forget about marriage. It just doesn't honor the sanctity of what a relationship is really supposed to be, which is just communication. And you should just break up.
Just break up, right? Call it a day.
Yeah.
And what about the people who justify it and will turn a cheek and be like, whether it's fear, they don't want to be alone, whatever the reason is.
Yeah.
That they'll justify and be like, oh, he did this. And knowing farewell that it might happen again.
It has to do with maybe their belief system. Maybe they think that that's
love.
Or they don't think that that's love, but they just don't think that's the biggest offense. Or they don't want to face it, or maybe they've cheated themselves in the past and they don't put so much weight on it. Maybe it's heavy denial. It could be a lot of different things. Yeah.
It just makes me so sad when I see amazing human beings accept this in their romantic partner. Woman to woman, man to woman does not matter.
Does not matter.
They just turn and they say, well, it happens and it's common. It's like, no.
It's not it happened because something's wrong. And so you have to address what's wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe you can fix it. Maybe you can't fix it. Maybe it's their journey with themselves and has nothing to do with you. Or maybe it does have something to do with you.
Yeah.
And you have contributed to it. So there's both aspects of it. So towards the end of all my podcast episodes, I have a closing tradition that I started because like yourself, so many of the guests have such amazing insights that they've learned over the years. So I ask everyone the same question. So the question is, what is the one lesson or learning to date that has been the most impactful and is carried with you throughout your journey?
Oh, God. You mean any lesson about relationships or anything?
Anything you have learned that has made you the Jillian that you are today.
Yeah.
The version of you are today. Obviously, we're always changing, but where you are today.
I think the most impactful lesson is that it really does begin with us. If I want to make a change in my life or my relationship or in any facet of my life, I'm the one who has to do that. I have to enlist help. But that, when we put our mind to something, we're very, very capable, but we can't, it really does really begin with us, and that it can be very seductive to feel like a victim in life. And look, sometimes life is incredibly hard and we are victimized by life. But how we get out of that starts with us. Like we have to just make the decision that we are going to do anything that we can to not feel that way anymore. And so I think that that's been the most profound, one of the harder lessons about life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it really does. Personal responsibility is
where it starts.
It's where it starts. Yeah.
And I love you for saying that, because a lot of your content, when I watch it, I've been following you for so long, is all about the accountability with the self, through which then we bounce off. And it's creating that foundation, right? So the foundation starts within. And I think you do such a phenomenal job at teaching men and women that piece.
Yes.
To then from there grow the rest of their aspects of their romantic relationships.
Yeah, it's really important. You're not nothing is going to improve in your life if you're not willing. And it's not about blame, but you're saying, okay, like, I need to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
I need to look at this. I need to put in some work. I need to make a shift in my beliefs, whatever it is. Like it all begins with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jillian, for doing this with me and taking out the time. And I think this is going to be one of my favorite episodes, because the journey with yourself and the relationships you have with others around you makes such a difference to the quality of the life that you're going to live, from a health perspective, from an emotional perspective, and just live.
Yeah. And
your relationship shapes so much of that. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this conversation.
Thank you.